Bullies grabbed her sleeves and laughed. She broke their jaws before class ended. Kira Valdez pressed her back against the cold metal of her locker, watching the hallway flow with students like a river she couldn't navigate. 3 months at Riverside High School in Colorado, and she still felt like a ghost drifting through conversations she wasn't invited to join. Her father's job transfer from Phoenix had landed them here, where her olive skin and quiet demeanor made her stick out like a single dark cloud in an endless blue sky. She tucked a strand of black hair behind her ear and grabbed her chemistry textbook, the weight of it familiar in her small hands. At barely 5 feet tall, with a frame that looked like it might snap in a strong wind, Kira had learned early that invisibility was her best defense. Back home, she'd been just another face in the crowd. Here, she was the new girl who spoke with the faintest hint of an accent inherited from her grandmother's lullabies. "Watch where you're going, migrant." The voice cut through her thoughts like broken glass. Derek Holbrook stood in front of her locker, his 6-foot frame blocking her path to first period. His Letterman jacket stretched across broad shoulders that had carried Riverside's football team to 3 consecutive state championships. Behind him, his usual shadows lingered. Tanner Mills with his cruel smirk and Becca Walsh, whose beauty came with barbs. Kira's fingers tightened around her textbook. "Excuse me, I need to get to class." Derek's laugh was sharp and hollow. "Did you hear that? She thinks she's polite." He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. "This is America, sweetheart. We speak English here." "I am speaking English," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible above the hallway chatter. "Could have fooled me." Tanner stepped forward, his phone already recording. "Say something in Mexican for the camera." "I'm not Mexican. I'm American." The words came out stronger than she intended, and she immediately regretted the flash of defiance. Becca's perfectly glossed lips curled into a smile that belonged in nightmares. "American? Prove it. Recite the Pledge of Allegiance." A crowd was gathering now, phone cameras pointed like weapons. Kira felt the familiar burn of shame crawling up her neck. The same feeling she'd gotten when kids in elementary school asked if her parents were legal, or when teachers pronounced her name wrong despite multiple corrections. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said quietly, trying to step around Derek. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist. "Actually, you do. See, this is our school, our hallway, our rules." Kira's free hand flexed involuntarily, muscle memory from countless hours in her father's garage turned gym threatening to surface. She could feel the ghost of boxing gloves on her hands, hear his voice. "Control, mija. Power without control is just destruction." She forced herself to go limp, to shrink smaller. "Let go of me," she whispered. Derek's grip tightened. "Or what? You'll run crying to your daddy? Oh wait, I heard he works at the meatpacking plant now. Fitting job for your kind." The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Her father, Miguel Valdez, had been a semi-professional boxer in his youth. His hands quick enough to dance around opponents twice his size. Those same hands now sorted cuts of beef for minimum wage. His dreams of opening a training gym buried under the weight of supporting his family. Kira pulled free and hurried down the hallway, Derek's laughter chasing her like a pack of wolves. She could hear Becca's voice carrying over the crowd. "Did you see how scared she looked?" "Like a little mouse." Chemistry class passed in a blur of formulas she couldn't concentrate on. Kira sat in the back row, her usual spot, trying to ignore the whispered comments and pointing fingers. Mrs. Peterson droned on about molecular structures, while Kira's mind wandered to the heavy bag hanging in her garage, to the rhythm of leather against canvas that had been her meditation since she was 8 years old. Her father had started training her after a particularly bad day at her old school, when she'd come home with a bloody nose and torn clothing. "Fighting is not about hurting others, mija," he'd told her, wrapping her small hands in tape. It's about protecting yourself and those who cannot protect themselves, but you must promise me only when there is no other choice." She'd made that promise, and she'd kept it through 3 months of escalating torment. Lunch period brought fresh humiliation. Kira found an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria, hoping to eat her sandwich in peace. She'd barely taken a bite when Derek's shadow fell across her tray. "Well, if it isn't our favorite foreign exchange student," he announced, his voice carrying across the room. "How's the food, Kira? Not too spicy for you?" Before she could respond, his hand knocked into her water bottle, sending it cascading across her sandwich and lap. The cold liquid soaked through her jeans as laughter erupted from nearby tables. "Oops," Derek said with mock sincerity. "My bad. Maybe you should be more careful where you sit." Kira stood slowly, water dripping from her clothes. Every eye in the cafeteria was on her, some sympathetic but most hungry for entertainment. She gathered her soggy lunch and walked to the bathroom, Derek's voice following her. "Don't forget to clean up your mess." In the bathroom mirror, she looked at herself, really looked. Her dark eyes held storms she'd been keeping locked away for months. Her small hands, steady and strong from years of training, trembled with suppressed rage. She thought of her father's words about control, about choosing battles wisely. But as she watched water drip from her hair onto the bathroom floor, she wondered how long wisdom could hold back the tide of fury building in her chest. The breaking point came 3 days later in the courtyard during lunch. Kira had found what she thought was a safe spot near the art building, sitting alone with a sketchbook. Drawing had always calmed her, flowing lines and shading that made sense when nothing else did. She was absorbed in sketching the old oak tree when a shadow fell across her page. Jamie Torres stood there, looking nervous but determined. Jamie had transferred to Riverside the same week as Kira, moving from California with their family. Unlike Kira, Jamie had an easy smile and natural charisma that had quickly earned them a place among the more accepting students. "Hey," Jamie said, settling down beside her. "Mind if I sit? That's really good, by the way." Kira felt heat rush to her cheeks. She'd been stealing glances at Jamie for weeks, admiring their confidence and the way they stood up to teachers who mispronounced students' names. "Thanks. It's just a tree." "Just a tree?" Jamie laughed, the sound like music. "You've captured something alive in those lines. You're really talented." For the first time in months, Kira smiled genuinely. "I've been drawing since I was little. My grandmother taught me." They talked easily about art, about the differences between Arizona and Colorado, about the challenge of starting over in a new place. Kira felt herself relaxing, felt the walls she'd built around herself beginning to crack. When Jamie mentioned struggling with calculus, she offered to help. "You'd do that?" Jamie's eyes lit up. "That would be amazing. I'm totally lost in Henderson's class." "Of course, we could meet in the library tomorrow after school." It was such a simple moment of human connection, but to Kira, it felt like finding water in a desert. She was still smiling when Derek and his crew approached, like storm clouds gathering overhead. "Well, well," Derek announced, his voice cutting through their conversation. "Looks like the immigrant found herself a friend." Kira's stomach dropped. She'd been careful to keep to herself, to avoid drawing attention to anyone who might show her kindness. Now her worst fear was materializing. Her toxicity was spreading to someone who didn't deserve it. "Actually, we were just finishing up," Jamie said calmly, starting to stand. Tanner blocked their path. "Not so fast. We haven't been properly introduced." He extended his hand toward Jamie with exaggerated politeness. "I'm Tanner. Welcome to Riverside High, where we appreciate diversity, just not too much diversity, if you know what I mean." "I don't," Jamie replied flatly, ignoring the offered handshake. Becca stepped closer, her smile predatory. "What my friend means is that we like to know who we're dealing with, and hanging out with certain people, well, it sends a message about what kind of person you are. Kira stood abruptly, her sketchbook falling to the ground. Leave them alone. This has nothing to do with Jamie. Oh, but it does, Derek said, picking up her sketchbook and flipping through it. See, Jamie here seems like good people. Smart, friendly, probably has a bright future ahead of them. It would be a shame if they got mixed up with the wrong crowd. He held up a page from her sketchbook, a portrait she'd drawn of her father in his boxing stance, gloves raised, eyes fierce with concentration. It was personal, private, and seeing it in Derek's hands felt like violation. What's this? Your daddy teaching you to fight? Derek showed the drawing to his friends, who burst into laughter. That's cute. Does he practice on a speed bag or just on other illegals at the plant? Something shifted inside Kira's chest, like a dam developing its first crack. Give that back. This? Derek held the sketchbook higher, out of her reach. I think I'll keep it. Consider it payment for letting you eat lunch here. Jamie stepped forward. Give it back to her, now. Or what? Becca moved to face Jamie directly. You'll tell the principal? Run home to mommy and daddy? News flash, nobody cares about little people like you two. Derek was still flipping through the sketchbook, his commentary growing more vicious with each page. Look at this one, guys. Is this supposed to be you, Kira? Because I've got to say, you made yourself way prettier than you actually are. The laughter felt like acid on her skin. Students from other tables were starting to notice, phones appearing to capture whatever was about to happen. Kira could see the cruel anticipation in their eyes, the same look crowds got at car races, waiting for the crash. Please, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded, just give it back. Derek's expression shifted, become something darker. You want it back? Beg for it. Get on your knees and beg, and maybe I'll consider it. The courtyard had gone quiet, except for the whisper of wind through the oak tree's branches. Kira felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the moment pressing down like a physical force. In her peripheral vision, she could see Jamie's face, shocked and angry on her behalf. I'm not going to beg, she said quietly. Then I guess you don't want it that badly. Derek raised the sketchbook above his head, preparing to tear it in half. Wait! The word exploded from her lips before she could stop it. Derek paused, savoring his victory. Changed your mind? Good. Now get down on your knees and say, please, Derek, I'm sorry for being in your country illegally, and I promise to know my place from now on. The words hung in the air like smoke. Kira felt something break inside her chest, felt years of swallowed pride and suppressed anger finally reaching their limit. She looked at Jamie, saw the horror in their eyes, and made a choice. No, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. I won't beg, and I'm not going anywhere. Derek's face darkened. Wrong answer. He ripped the sketchbook in half, pages scattering like autumn leaves. Kira's drawings, her memories, her private thoughts, pieces of her soul, lay trampled on the concrete. But instead of breaking her, watching her artwork destroyed seemed to unlock something that had been sleeping inside her chest. For the first time in months, Kira felt her father's blood running through her veins, felt the training he'd drilled into her muscle memory, awakening like a hibernating bear. You're going to regret that, she said quietly. Derek laughed, but there was something different in her tone that made him take a step back. What did you just say to me? Kira bent down and gathered the torn pieces of her sketchbook, her movements careful and deliberate. When she stood, her posture had changed. Her shoulders were squared, her stance balanced, her hands loose at her sides, in a way that spoke of readiness rather than submission. I said you're going to regret that, she repeated, her voice carrying a new edge that made several students in the crowd shift nervously. Tanner stepped forward, sensing the change in dynamic, but not understanding it. Did the little mouse just threaten us? She thinks she's tough now, Becca added, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Derek recovered his swagger, puffing out his chest. You know what? I think it's time someone taught you a lesson about respect. He reached for Kira's sleeve, intending to grab and humiliate her further. His fingers had barely made contact with her shirt when everything changed. Kira's left hand came up in a fluid motion, trapping his wrist against her shoulder. Her right hand drove forward in a short, sharp punch that connected with his solar plexus. Derek doubled over, gasping, and Kira pivoted on her left foot, using his own momentum to send him sprawling across the concrete. The courtyard erupted in shocked exclamations. Derek rolled to his hands and knees, blood trickling from where his chin had scraped the ground. What the hell? Tanner charged forward with a wild swing, more surprised than skilled. Kira ducked under his punch easily, her body moving with the fluid grace of years of training. She grabbed his extended arm, stepped across his body, and used a hip toss to send him crashing into the nearby bike rack. The metallic clang echoed across the suddenly silent courtyard. Becca backed away, her earlier bravado evaporating. You psycho! I'm calling security! Go ahead, Kira said calmly, not even breathing hard. Tell them what happened. Tell them how 3 of you cornered me and destroyed my property. Derek struggled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Blood from his split lip dripped onto his Letterman jacket. You little freak! Do you have any idea who you just messed with? Yeah, Kira replied, settling into a fighting stance that would have made her father proud. I messed with a bully who doesn't know when to quit. Derek rushed her with the mindless fury of someone who'd never faced real resistance before. Kira sidestepped his charge and caught him with a precise uppercut that snapped his head back. As he stumbled backward, she followed up with a cross that caught him square on the jaw. The crack of impact echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. Derek's eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the concrete, unconscious before he hit the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Students stood frozen, phones still recording, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. The quiet girl who'd been tormented for months had just taken down 3 bullies with the precision of a trained fighter. Kira stood over Derek's unconscious form, her chest rising and falling steadily. For a moment, she felt the temptation to keep going, to make them pay for every humiliation, every cruel word, every moment of fear they'd caused her. Her fists clenched, and she could feel the dark satisfaction of revenge calling to her. But then she heard her father's voice in her memory. Power without control is just destruction, Miha. The strongest fighters know when to stop. She unclenched her fists and stepped back, looking down at Derek's still form. Stay down, she said quietly. We're done here. Tanner was slowly picking himself up from the bike rack, his face pale with shock and fear. Becca stood frozen near the art building, her usual confidence shattered. Neither of them made any move to help their fallen leader. Is there a problem here? The voice belonged to Mr. Rodriguez, the assistant principal, who had arrived just in time to see Derek's unconscious body on the ground. His eyes moved from the scattered art supplies to the stunned students to Kira, who stood calmly in the center of it all. Derek slipped and fell, Jamie said quickly, stepping to Kira's side. Hit his head pretty hard. Several students nodded in agreement, and Kira was surprised to see sympathetic faces in the crowd. Apparently, Derek's reign of terror had made him more enemies than friends. Is that true, Miss Valdez? Mr. Rodriguez asked, his tone carefully neutral. Kira looked down at Derek, then at the torn remains of her sketchbook scattered across the concrete. She thought about her father's teachings, about the difference between fighting and fighting back, about the line between justice and revenge. He was bothering me and my friend, she said finally. I defended myself. Mr. Rodriguez nodded slowly. He'd been an educator long enough to recognize the signs of a bullying situation, and he'd seen enough of Derek's behavior to know which side was more likely telling the truth. Tanner, Becca, help get Derek to the nurse's office, he instructed. Everyone else, clear out. Show's over. As the crowd dispersed, Jamie bent down and started gathering the pieces of Kira's torn sketchbook. Some of these might be salvageable, they said softly. Kira knelt beside them, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Thank you for standing up for me, I mean. Thank you for standing up for both of us, Jamie replied, meeting her eyes. That was incredible. Where did you learn to fight like that? My father taught me, Kira said, feeling a swell of pride in her voice. He said I should only use it to protect myself or others who couldn't protect themselves. Well, mission accomplished, Jamie said with a smile. I don't think Derek will be bothering anyone for a while. Over the following days, word of the courtyard confrontation spread through Riverside High like wildfire. The story grew with each telling. Some versions had Kira taking on 6 attackers. Others claimed Derek was in the hospital with a broken jaw. The truth was both simpler and more powerful. A quiet girl had finally stood up for herself, and the school's most notorious bully had learned that his victims weren't as helpless as he'd assumed. Derek returned to school 3 days later with a black eye and a significantly reduced ego. He avoided Kira completely, his usual swagger replaced by nervous glances and careful detours around her locker. Tanner and Becca followed his lead, their cruel comments replaced by whispered conversations that died whenever Kira passed by. The change in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Students who had never spoken to Kira before nodded in acknowledgement as she walked the halls. Teachers who had previously ignored the subtle signs of harassment suddenly seemed more alert to classroom dynamics. Even the janitor, Mr. Martinez, stopped her one morning to say, "My daughter heard what you did. I'm proud of you, Mija," but perhaps the most significant change was in Kira herself. She walked taller now, her head up instead of down, her eyes meeting those of others instead of studying the floor. The invisible walls she'd built around herself had crumbled, replaced by a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with self-respect. 3 weeks after the confrontation, she was leaving the library after a calculus tutoring session with Jamie when she heard familiar voices around the corner. Derek and his remaining crew were clustered near the vending machines, their conversation hushed but urgent. "I'm telling you, she's not normal," Tanner was saying. "Nobody learns to fight like that just messing around." "Maybe her dad really was some kind of fighter," Becca added nervously. "I heard he used to box professionally." Derek's voice was quieter than Kira had ever heard it, stripped of its usual arrogance. "Doesn't matter. We're done with her. She wants to be left alone. She gets left alone." "Since when do you back down from anyone?" Tanner challenged. Derek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "Since I realized that being strong doesn't mean hurting people who can't fight back. She could have really hurt me that day, and she chose not to. That's the kind of strength I never understood before." Kira felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness at his words. Derek was learning, growing, becoming something better than what he'd been. But she also knew that growth often came at the cost of others' pain, and she wondered how many students like her had suffered before his moment of clarity arrived. She turned away from the conversation and found Jamie waiting by the main entrance, their face bright with the smile that had become the best part of Kira's days. "Ready for that coffee?" Jamie asked, shouldering their backpack. "Definitely," Kira replied, pushing through the double doors into the Colorado sunshine. As they walked toward downtown, Jamie suddenly stopped and turned to face her. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "That day in the courtyard, when you decided to fight back, what changed? What made you finally stand up?" Kira considered the question carefully. "I think it was watching him destroy something I'd created, my art, my memories. I realized that staying quiet wasn't protecting me anymore. It was just enabling him to keep taking pieces of who I was." "And now?" Kira looked back at the school building, where students were streaming out into the afternoon light. Some walked alone, some in groups, but all of them moved with the knowledge that bullying had consequences, that victims could become victors, that power dynamics could shift in the space of a heartbeat. "Now I remember that being strong doesn't mean you have to hurt people," she said. "But it also doesn't mean you have to let them hurt you." Jamie nodded thoughtfully. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He is," Kira agreed, thinking of Miguel Valdez coming home each evening with tired hands and patient eyes, ready to listen to her stories and remind her that strength came in many forms. "He taught me that fighting isn't about winning or losing. It's about standing up for what's right, even when you're scared." "Were you scared that day?" Kira smiled, remembering the moment when Derek's hand had touched her sleeve, when 3 months of suppressed anger had finally found its voice. "Terrified. But I was more scared of what I'd become if I kept letting them walk all over me." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the Rocky Mountains rising in the distance like gentle giants. Kira thought about the girl she'd been just a month ago, quiet, invisible, afraid. That girl still existed inside her, but now she was accompanied by someone stronger, someone who understood that true power came not from the ability to hurt others, but from the courage to protect yourself and those you cared about. At the coffee shop, Jamie insisted on buying their drinks as a celebration. "To standing up," they said, raising their cup in a toast. "To knowing when to stop," Kira replied, clinking her cup against theirs. As the afternoon sun streamed through the coffee shop windows, Kira reflected on the lessons her father had taught her, both in the garage gym and in life. Violence was never the first answer, but sometimes it was the only language bullies understood. The key was using that language to communicate boundaries, not to inflict unnecessary pain. Derek's jaw had healed, but his perspective had been permanently altered. Tanner and Becca had learned that cruelty had consequences, and Kira had discovered that the quiet strength her father had always seen in her could coexist with the fierce determination to never again let anyone make her feel small. The girl who had pressed her back against cold lockers and wished for invisibility was gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength wasn't about the ability to throw a punch. It was about having the wisdom to know when violence was necessary and the character to show mercy when it wasn't. In the end, the most important victory hadn't been the fight in the courtyard. It had been the moment afterward, when she'd chosen to step back instead of forward, when she'd remembered her father's voice and honored the values he'd instilled in her. Bullies had grabbed her sleeves and laughed, thinking they'd found another easy target. Instead, they'd awakened something that had been sleeping inside her all along, not a monster, but a protector. And that protector would ensure that no one at Riverside High would ever again mistake her quietness for weakness, her kindness for vulnerability, or her desire for peace as an invitation for war.